Hello everyone. Welcome to this lecture on understanding the theoretical perspectives of explaining violence against women. This lecture is a part of your paper on gender, media and society. This lecture will help you understand the concept of violence against women, its different forms, as well as the theoretical perspectives behind women abuse. It will also discuss the importance of engaging men and boys in addressing violence. The pronouncement of United Nations on the abolition of violence against women, which is VAW for short, implemented in the year 1993, outlines VAW as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivations of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. According to United Nations, this definition was given in the year 1993. VAW is an act of defilement of human rights as well. It hinders the perspective of women to progress their capabilities, enjoy their fundamental freedoms and lead a meaningful life based on freedom of choice. The VAW is an endemic feature of diverse cultures, societies and kingdoms across the globe, cutting over class, ethnicity, age, theological and national frontiers, and is evident in the fact that the different bodies under the United Nations are working rigorously to fulfill the mandate of ending this social malady. Notwithstanding such overwhelming global advocacy and adoption of legal measure, VAW continues unabated across the world. The most common form is interpersonal violence. It is inflicted by another person or by a small group of people on a woman and is the most universal form of violence against women, as it takes place in all societies, according to Kranz and Gracia Moreno. It is additionally separated into two subsections: family or violence committed by intimate partner, also known as domestic violence, and community violence. While domestic or intimate partner violence is committed by family members and takes place at home, it includes bodily, emotive and or sexual exploitation of women, according to Hayes. On the other hand, community violence takes place outside the home and the perpetrator may or may not be known to the victim. VAW is a life course perspective. Women encounter violence in every phase of their lifespan, from the pre-birth stage through infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood up to elderly age. Even before being born, a girl fetus is aborted ruthlessly or at birth, which is called feticide. Female babies are often killed, which is infanticide, and some culture due to obsessive son preference. Overwhelming bias for having sons continue to affect girls and women throughout their life cycles. At infancy, girl children are likely to be the least cared for, receiving improper food, nutrition and threatened by physical and sexual abuse. During girlhood, these abuses continue to operate, with young girls given limited or no choice and opportunity to avail education and health related services compared to their male counterparts. In addition, girls are forced to get married much before they attain puberty by their parents, which in turn is associated with severe physical and mental health consequences. Besides, in many cultures, young girls undergo the heinous practice of female circumcision or FGM, which is female genital mutilation, explained by WHO as the partial or total removal of the external genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs, whether for cultural, religious or other non-therapeutic reasons. The practice of FGM originated from the male desire to control female sexuality, although there are several biased convictions on this as well. Adolescent girls who have attained puberty often fall victims of sexual abuse, neglect, trafficked, and forced into prostitution. Incidences of incest, especially fathers and brothers sexually abusing daughters and sisters, is also common. During this age, adolescent girls also experience dating and courtship related violence such as acid attacks, honor killings, etc. Women are at a higher risk of facing violence after marriage, which includes occurrences of domestic violence, where the husband or sometimes in-laws might attack, rape, or commit murder. Few of the exploitations confronted by married women during the procreative age group comprise marital rape, abuse for dowry with murder, sexual assault, mental abuse, spouse homicide, exploitation of women with disabilities, enforced pregnancy, etc. Older women which might be mental, physical or sexual assault including monetary or material assault, or as untainted abandonment, signifying the disaster to realize a caution providing responsibility. Incidences of enforced suicide or killing of widows for economic motives are also usual. Conceptual viewpoints for intimate partner violence. Several conceptual viewpoints from which intimate partner violence, which is IPV, has been explained, for instance, are psychological, example frustration aggression theory, social learning theory, cognitive behavioral theory, biobehavioral, example neurochemical mechanisms, criminological, economical, and sociological explanations, according to Hees in the year 2012, Michel and Vanya in 2009. From the sociological perspective, IPV has been addressed through theory of feminism, theory of family conflict, theory of resource, and theory of dependency. Feminist theory. According to the feminist perspective, IPV is a manifestation of patriarchy, which establishes male's authority over female, according to Dobash and Dobash in the year 1979. According to Larson in the year 2012, such forms of violence are consequent upon endemic gender inequalities in social order, legal mechanisms, and social institutions. As a society embarks on the path to gender equality, the incidence of IPV is expected to come down. Hees in the year 2012 argued that power and control in relationships, social norms condoning wife beating, and structural and economic forces that keep women trapped in abusive relationships. The most important contribution of the feminist perspective lies in their assertion that the socio-economic context in terms of caste, class, ethnicity, etc. is the major influencing factor for IPV. Preceding to the movement of feminism, it was the sufferers who were frequently, indirectly or directly accused for being abused. Example, classifying them as unusual, manly personalities, according to Michel and Vanya in the year 2009. Family conflict theory. The proponents of the family conflict theory disagree with the feminist perspectives and debate that gender disparity is just one of the several reasons that impact incidence of IPV. Other reasons such as salary, age, and occupation rank of couples show more significant role. The main argument of these theorists is that not each man is principally ferocious, even in communities categorized by high insights of gender dissimilarity. Therefore, clarifications for IPV should be sought in the hardships of everyday life. Jellies states that in the year 1985, violence happens as a response to socially constructed stress, which is unevenly distributed, for example, less income, joblessness, failing health, and other indicators of disadvantage, and the institutionalized inequalities among socio-economic, gender, and racial divides. Gels further emphasizes that when viciousness is the accepted response or adaptation to stress by the lone individual or society involved, then the socially structured stress can accelerate fluctuating levels of domestic brutality. Resource theory. Good in 1971 for the first time put forward the resource theory to explain IPV. He argued that imbalance of power between two companions is frequently catalyzed by the assets that the individuals subsidize to the connection. He also asserted that force and its threat can be used when other resources are unavailable or have proved ineffective. That is, men with fewer resources outside the relationship, say for example, when facing unemployment or financial hardship, are more likely to make use of violence in order to re-establish their control within the relationship, according to Larson. An addition of the theory of resource is recognized as relative resource theory. It highlights on the disbalance in financial and societal assets between males and females in a communion rather than absolute resources being held by men, according to Macmillan and Gartner in the year 1999 and McCloskey in the year 1996. Thus, those males who possess lesser assets such as income or education in comparison to their female co-equals are more likely to perpetrate IPV to regain their power. Based on this perspective, the gender resource theory moves a step further and proposes that IPV is rather an interaction between status inconsistencies in relationships and the male partner's gender ideology, according to Larson. It interpreted in simple terms that if men's psyche are not informed by patriarchal ideologies that ordain men as the breadwinner and women as the homemaker stereotype, if they view their female counterparts as equal partners in the relationship, then they would not need to reassert their supremacy over their female partners through the use of violence, according to Atkinson. Dependency theory. Dependency theory reconciles the concept around the patrilineal construction of society and those that emphasize the role of socio-economic factors. The main argument of this theory is that complete socio-financial assets of women are the greatest crucial issues moderately than the assets of either the family or the men be it absolute ownership or relative ownership vis-a-vis the women. The argumentation line conditions that the low socioeconomic status accorded to women in patriarchal societies entitle them to limited opportunities and expose them to multiple constraints, which in turn weaken the control of women upon their lives, rendering them to rely on their male partners. This also put them at higher feeling male violence, according to Rodriguez, Maines and Safronoff in the year 2012. Brutality against women in public spaces. In an earlier chapter in this module, it has been discussed that sexual division of labor and framing the private sphere as the legitimate place for women are the primary reasons behind women's subordinate status in the society. Patriarchal structures, through a range of moral injunctions about gender appropriate behavior, ensure that women do not transgress this socially decreed spatial boundary between the private and the public. Such segregation of spaces, although not always complete in the sense that the private and public spaces routinely seem to overlap is the most apparent and rigidly enforced in the cities. The city is looked upon by many as the representation of masculine agency and culture, which excludes women. Research on women's access to public spaces points out that women are more probable to encounter fear of violence in public spaces, even if they have not faced any act of violence personally in these places. Socialization plays an important role in teaching them that public spaces are not places where good women hang around. Thus, the notions of shame and honor, social stigma, reward and punishments, ideal femininity, etc. also operate behind women's anxiety in public places. In order to avoid risking their reputation and reproduce respectability even as they access these masculine spaces, they tend to adhere to different forms of avoidance behavior, like avoiding a few corners of the city or avoiding venturing out after night falls, which actually limits their life choices, both for work and leisure. Valentine in the year 1989 opined that the amalgamation of terror with public places and the simultaneous protection initiated by women constitute a spatial expression of patriarchy. It is due to this terror that city places are encountered contrarily by men and women. In the Indian context, significant contributions have been made by Phadke in the year 2007 and Ranade again in the year 2007 in their work on mapping the public spaces of Mumbai. Ranade opined that females, when moving via the public place, walk purposefully and avoid those spaces which are considered as unsafe and unrespectable, such as bars, lottery shops, etc. She concluded that women can only acquire public space rightfully when she can find out a sense of justification for being in such spaces. Phadke in the year 2007 maintained that the risks in respect to women in public spaces include that of potential physical assault, jeopardizing their reputation, the risk of being blamed for inviting sexual assault onto themselves, and the risk of losing access to the resources and opportunities that the public spaces offer to the citizens. Although some scholars observe that the assumptions about women's fear in public places is an outcome of stereotypes about their timidity and fearfulness in the face of a male aggression. Further, they observe that the more women would claim the public spaces, the less will be their fear of being victimized due to male violence therein. However, this may not be always true. As observed by Paul in the year 2013, the professional working women in night shifts at the BPOs, which is the business process outsourcing, and KPOs, which are knowledge process outsourcing centers in the Kolkata city, despite routinely engaging with public spaces during odd hours of the night, continue to feel sexually intimidated and apprehensive, irrespective of the sectors in which they are working. This is partially because it is in the usually accessed public spaces that they develop some claim to rightful utilization by routinely engaging with these spaces, according to Paul in the research in the year 2011, and acquire a sense of at-homeness within the domain of their known spaces through repetitive use. These findings are in consonance with that of a recent study by Asocham in the year 2012, which showed that majority of the women surveyed sense insecurity, particularly throughout the shifting at night in all chief economic hubs all over the country. Official statistics indicate that crime against women, especially rape, is on the rise in all major Indian cities. In particular, the 16th December 2012 incident of the violent gang rape of a 23-year-old Delhi medical student triggered momentous public sentiment and renewed focus on the Park Street rape case in Kolkata that took place early in 2012. The reason behind the persistence of feelings of fear and anxiety among women, despite such an intensive engagement with public space envisaged by working through evening and night shifts, is a baffling question indeed. As Patel observed, women's physical mobility and access to urban areas are regulated by a timescape that limits their presence during the evening and night, particularly if they are going out alone. Historically, all rules and legislations in India pertaining to women's employment, namely the Indian Factories Act in the year 1911, the Bombay Maternity Benefit Act resulted in limiting the scope of women's involvement in the work strength in the name of protecting women, and consequently legitimized the social concept of nightscape as domain of men through legal sanctions. The Article 66C of the Indian Factories Act 1948 prohibited employment of women in the factory premises beyond 6 am to 7 pm. This act was finally amended in the year 2005 in response to address the need of the hour necessitated by globalization, whereby employment of women was allowed between 7 pm and 6 am. About 92% of working women feel insecure, especially during night, in all major hubs of economic activities across the country, especially in key segments such as BPOs and ITs, hospitality, civil aviation and nursing homes. Public transport, buses and roadsides are reported as spaces where women and girls face high level of sexual harassment. It said about 56% of such workforce in medium sector is quite apprehensive about their safety and security, particularly after the dark is set in. Engaging men and boys in addressing VAW. Rampant incidents of VAW continue to plague our societies the world over, despite countless measures adopted at the national and international points to combat brutality. Probably, these measures are incapable of addressing the mindset of the society at large. Thus, a major step in this direction could be to engage men and boys in the fight against VAW. There is also need to eliminate the advantages and privileges that such violence gives to males. In addition to adopting affirmative actions oriented programs, sensitizing the men and boys, the state must also focus on providing safe streets, timely justice and other basic public goods for everyone in order to produce a facilitating environment for all. The absence of these basic amenities limit women's choices and options for, say, education, employment, seeking health, etc., thus reinforcing patriarchal stronghold. Patriarchal ideologies dictate that females are feebler sex and should be sheltered by men. Gravel, Professor, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Yale University, mentioned that women are property to be protected or to be destroyed. Protective if they can prove they are innocent and thus deserving of protection, or destroyed if they flout social norms. However, men turn out not to be protectors because most often the male perpetrators of crime hostile to women in a public and private space is known to women or are their intimate partners. Even the state and its various functionaries, being the citadel of masculine power, fail to provide protection to the women. Most cases of rape are not registered by the police, and incidents of blaming the victim for inviting such untoward incidents by dressing or behaving improperly in the public spaces are rampant. In contemporary India, rape has emerged as a brazen display of male power. That both men as well as boys require to be involved in slowing down the unrelenting march of patriarchal ethos has gained considerable advocacy in recent times. Merely focusing on women's empowerment is not likely to adequately address violence-related issues. In fact, several studies point out that women's greater access to economic resources, microcredits or employment expose them to greater risk of violence because it challenges the patriarchal status quo between men and women. According to the International Conference on Population and Development, which is ICPD, held in the year 1994, men play a key role in most societies. They exercise preponderant power in every sphere of life. To promote gender equality, it is necessary to encourage and enable men to take responsibility for their sexual and reproductive behavior and their social and family roles. The International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, 1994, and the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, 1995, completely changed the way in which men and masculinities were conceived and situated within the discourse of women's empowerment and gender equality. Boys and men came to be recognized as integral part of the fight for gender justice. This is especially relevant in India, where the construction of masculinity and real man is remarkably influenced by class, caste, linguistic ethnicity, etc. In a research conducted by the ICRW in partnership with UNFPA on men and women aged 18 to 49 years from the Indian states of UP, Rajasthan, Punjab and Haryana, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, it's been observed that masculinity, that is men controlling behavior and gender inequitable attitudes, strongly determines men's preference for sons over daughters, as well as their proclivity for violence towards an intimate partner, both of which are manifestations of gender inequality. Thus, the study recommends that in order to eliminate son preference and IPV among other measures such as promoting education, initiating dialogues amongst the men in the community, etc., it is imperative to include men in encouraging gender fairness and in decreasing traditional practices that reinforce gender discernment. The findings also highlight that the fact that childhood experiences of violence also play a major role in either encouraging the man to commit VAW or the woman to tolerate it. A number of studies have pointed out that men who commit acts of brutality are more expected to have seen such incidents at home in their childhoods. Results from an skilled discussion amongst the Government of India and the representatives of civil society on gender impartiality with a distinct emphasis on men, matches Mo's, and the development agenda post 2015 show that the most successful efforts to engage men and boys in addressing VAW are those which engage with them during puberty, before gender prejudices and social standards are completely internalized. If they can be engaged during such formative stages, then it is possible to prevent the consolidation of harmful patriarchal notions in the construction of their masculine identities. To conclude and sum up this lecture, we have learned that women experience violence all through their life, spanning from pre-birth through early childhood to girlhood, puberty, adulthood up to the old age. Violence committed upon women can take the form of physical, psychological and sexual abuse, and many times it may take place in the so-called safe havens of the home, which is by intimate partner violence, as well as the masculine public spaces. Most often the perpetrators of the crime are known to the victims. The root cause of this social malady is the patriarchal social structure, which does not only accord men with greater privilege and power, but also rewards violent acts of aggression. Hence, in order to put an end to violence, not only the women need to be empowered, but also the boys and men need to be engaged in the fight for gender justice. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. For more details, please read the e-text of this lecture properly and attempt the questions in the end. Thank you.